Hisano Kuroda, the old woman by the river, the grieving widow, the grandmother, and the death arcana is mechanically the simplest of the social links that you choose to interact with in Persona 4, although not the easiest to always schedule for. She appears every Sunday and almost every holiday by the Samagawa floodplain after your chance encounter inside of the Devil social link. She requires almost no way for you to mess up ranking her up. And aside from a section in the middle where you have to talk to the man at Daidara twice, all she asks is that you listen to her story. It's terrifying, I'd imagine, getting old, slowly growing apart from everyone you know, and if you're lucky to survive, you have to bear with seeing your lifelong friends die around you. It's honestly horrifying, and on top of that, the younger people around you rarely pay you mind or ask you to share your story, your memories, what made you human. It might make you feel like you're dead and still walking. It's like having a treasure trove of knowledge and information that you can imagine being wiped away permanently into the recesses of lost experience. So yeah, it makes sense that you don't have much to do. You listening is as much a shoulder as anyone could ever want at that age. Hisano Kuroda is a woman who lived her whole life in the small town of Inaba and now finds herself plagued with guilt over the feelings that she had approaching her husband's death. Her husband, who she believed would be by her side to the very end and love her forever, as he promised. I think some people would roll their eyes when seeing an old woman in fitting funeral attire representing the death arcana. But the death actually surrounds her husband, and not her, or her old age necessarily. Hers is the life that she must regain following his death. Also, the death arcana just means more than that, but we'll cover her arcana properly at a later time in this segment. You find later that part of the reason Hisano's comfortable with you is that you looked like her early husband, or at least that's what a lot of old people tend to claim about younger people. Combine that with her learning in your initial conversation that you are not from Inaba, but simply moved here temporarily, and suddenly Hisano has sort of a pseudo-opportunity to work through her grief and gain closure over her husband's passing. Hisano considers herself to be death itself, the Grim Reaper, the one responsible and who even wished for her husband's passing, which at first seems cruel but is revealed later and honestly gives the impression that she was way too hard on herself. She states early on that she feels like her husband has forgiven her whenever you're around her, but later tries to insist upon not seeing you because it hurts her too much whenever you're around. When you look like her beloved, returning in nostalgic form. When Hisano was a young girl, she met her husband in a traveling show that only came by once a year. They happened to meet and become pen pals, and she was enthralled with him and assumed he maybe had other girls in other towns, but still, his love shone the same. They sent countless letters back and forth. Eventually, he quit his job and moved to Inaba, proving to her that she really was the only one for him. He worked the fields, blistering and burning his back to make a life for him and her. He was proud to have her as his wife. It's the sort of romantic classic story you sometimes hear older people say to their grandchildren, as if it were some magical encounter, and for all the variables that go into a life, it could, under some circumstances, very well be considered one. She says a line that has been retooled, rephrased, and recontextualized all through time. Happiness is something that you only recognize after it's already happened. She wants to pass on and spend forever with him, but she feels like the guilt over her actions will keep her from even unionizing with him in the afterlife. She thinks that she's going to hell. After pondering on how people contextualize and cope with death in their lives, Hisano spends her next social link asking about you. She seems to take genuine joy in hearing your stories of youth, yet decides it's best to stop meeting and leaves. Upon insisting to her again, she meets with you and, among other statements about the true nature of love, emphasizes the lasting utility of a letter. How a written line can convey so much more than even 100 speeches in regards to your feelings. The physicality of it, the handwriting, the ability to read it over and over, emphasizing each word each time. She mentions she no longer has the letters, but you are able to find them and retrieve them from Daidara without wasting another day or time slot. The next couple of links are her rereading the letters and remembering again, that the depth of the letters her husband and her wrote are true. The feelings she had are real. She's assured in the passion of her younger husband. This is where it was revealed that her husband had dementia. Hisano loved and thought they would live with each other until the end, but dementia ripped this away from both of them. The terror of having a barely cognizant brain shifting through the deteriorated canals of one's precious life story, slowly becoming unable to obtain more and more until the person passes into a constant fugue state. It's truly a death before death. Honestly, my number one fear. Something cruel and psychologically terrifying just to think about. We like to think that we are our spirit, the ghost inside of us, that the ghost in the machine pushes us onward into the afterlife when we die. But how do we reconcile with the ghost seemingly being unable to maintain its identity in lieu with the deterioration of our brain? It makes us think about the eventual deterioration had after death, but after death is where it should stay if it must exist at all. I don't have many fears, either rational or irrational. Of course I favor security, but there's not much that will make me weep in terror more than the idea of brain deteriorative diseases. They stand in very opposition to everything I perceive as important in my life. My ability to enjoy, observe, and understand the world. If death is ripping off the cognitive band-aid, dementia, Alzheimer's, and the like are slowly peeling off each hair the band-aid covers. Hisano had to take care of this man, the person that she dedicated her whole life to, the person she loved more than anything, and she had to live, eventually, being asked every day who she was by the person who put light in her heart. She had to carry the memories, the letters, the self that he had corroded away from his inside out. The player was her burden to bear, to fulfill her side of the promise, to spend all of their remaining time together. But eventually it wasn't enough. She wanted to end his suffering. She wished for his death, the death of the person who laid life to her world. And even in entire responsibility, his shortly following death made her regret her words. Now, not even the moving physical body that contained the working mind she once loved would be there to say a word to her. Still, the power of a letter is greater than 100 speeches. It portrayed his love as if the day he first wrote it. It showed the man that he was to her again, and she was, by a past version of himself, forgiven.
But the truth is, I don't have any special powers like that. I am not death, just another boring human being, waiting for a miracle that never came. Before I knew it, I was wishing death on the one person I loved most in the world. I was lonely, forgotten, and loving, being loved. All that is what goes into making us human.
She ends her arc deciding to live as the younger version of Hisano, that the younger version of him loved. The one filled with so much youthfulness, curiosity, and love. The final rank ends with Hisano agreeing to move with her younger family into another town, leaving Inaba for the first time, starting anew. This life, this town she had here, has reached its chapter. It's time for a new, younger Hisano, a reincarnated soul, to start her second life's journey again, even this late. If you answer you have a loved one, she leaves you with this as she leaves on a reinvigorated quest.
Live a long and full life. That is the greatest thing you can do for your beloved.
Hisano Kuroda, more oftenly referred to as the Old Lady, is a person who learns to be young again. Someone who, through the guilt of her husband's passing, through the suffering she saw him go through, and through the reunitedness of him through your appearance handing her the letters and his words, was able to be forgiven by herself anew, given permission to keep living again. I've seen very polarizing opinions on this link. While some people laud its writing and mature handling of complex topics, while others have cited it as boring for being a single backdrop that it uses, I think that there's something poetic to be gathered from this setting. Hisano is the Samigawa floodplain. She was moving energetically, passing through life within the plane, but washed ashore, where you meet her at some point, giving her the push to rejoin the waters and live anew. Her last name, Kuroda, stands for the sort of black rice patties often farmed in times of old, but were not eaten. They were given as honor to the gods. In those younger, far-off days of Hisano's life, her husband worked the field, made a living, made food through the rice fields, and now Hisano's later days, the letters her husband wrote, cultivated in her a new sort of crop that she could use to honor to the life that she still has. Hisano is the Death Arcana, which, aside from the clear ways that it's already used as blatant themes of death in her social link, other aspects of death find themselves present as well. The Death card is sometimes less about physical death than it is about the death necessary to create a great transition in one's life. In Hisano's case, it is both. Her great transition, aside from mentally, also leads to her moving away from her hometown for the first time in her life. The Hebrew letter for the tarot of death is Nun, which when used as a noun means fish, also placing more emphasis on both how her name and the character arc align so well with her place by the waters and the fishing spot of the floodplain. The card is ruled by Scorpio, meaning that it is a water card, also bringing back to the idea that Hisano was living, moving forward through the river, and washed ashore until you helped her realize life was worth it. You erased her guilt and returned her to the stream anew. This card deals with the transition of death and life, sometimes seen as life after death. After the death process with her husband, she grows mentally into a newer, younger self in her old age. In lower polarity, an involuntary death is often represented. In Hisano's case, it may be the lower polarity of a living death, the lethargy of her day-to-day caring for her husband, and the fact that the husband she knew and loved had already passed away while his body remained breathing. I know that this was a particularly dark segment, but that's how Persona is. It aims to give a window into all sorts of unique phases of people's lives, and asks us to take from it what we can to grow as stronger and more defined people. That is why the act of finishing social links ups the power of the subconscious shadows fused, and even which ones are unlocked, because grasping better at the different aspects of the human condition lends us to better wield their understanding subconsciously. If you liked this video, please leave a comment and share where you can find Persona fans. This is part of a huge series that I am making covering all of Persona 4 Golden, and I appreciate any financial support to keep it running on Patreon or on Twitch through my PayPal. On Patreon, you'll also receive behind-the-scenes things, so if you're into that, hey. I hope you'll turn on notifications and wait for the next video and see me next time, or comment on this video until that time comes. See you soon.